Today's episode is brought to you by Forvis Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. A healthy working relationship, like any relationship, is reciprocal. Good bosses are quite flexible with their employees. Working parents, for example, may need some time off to pick up their kids from school. So long as the requests are reasonable and the job isn't compromised, most bosses are pretty understanding. But what if the requests aren't reasonable? And who decides on what is reasonable and what isn't? It used to be the boss, but not anymore. Changes to the Fair Work Act mean that employers must consider any type of request. Paul Cott, principal at law on Lydiard, begins by explaining the rules and process of flexible work arrangement requests to Chris Ashmore.
It's a bit of a technical term because an employee can always, with the employee's consent, work flexibly, but they're on a formal process. It has to be in writing, putting in a request to say because of certain reasons, the employee is asking the employer to change something around the arrangements pertaining to their work. It's changing such as the hours of work, the location, whether you can split the shifts up, work some days and not others, work at two different sites, job sharing, almost endless list of possibilities which vary the normal arrangements as to work.
Mm-hmm. So can we have a look at some of the circumstances an employee can request flexible working arrangements? What things were you looking at?
You can job share with someone to say, look, I'm working 30 hours a week now. I've got another commitment. It's going to take me 15 hours. Can I just work 15 hours? And so that other 15 hours of my job somebody else does. So job sharing, working at different sites, doing different duties, dividing up the duties, doing certain duties that the person's doing now. Any type of change in the arrangement as to the pattern and the hours of work.
Whether you're full-time, part-time or casual.
Correct.
And so the employee who wants more flexibility, they make a formal request in writing.
Correct, yeah.
And the employer, can they ignore it?
They can, but if they do, after 21 days, that is a deemed refusal.
Right.
So then if there's a refusal and there's no reason, the employee then has a right to escalate it to the Fair Work Commission. Normally, if the employer refuses, they have to give a reason, and that reason has to be based on reasonable business grounds. But if they don't respond at all, then there's no reason, and that's a refusal.
So the boss really should be making a fair income look at the request and providing a response.
Correct. And that's actually part of the changes, exactly that, is that the employer now has to really genuinely consider the request and not just quickly discard it. They have to genuinely discuss with the employee and genuinely try to reach an agreement. So ideally, put the response in writing. The request is done in writing, and so should the response be. Having said that, as I said, they can discuss it verbally as well.
Can all employees make a valid, flexible working request?
No, not all. Permanent, full-time and part-time, yes. Casuals, yes. But you have to be there for 12 months, minimum term. And with casuals, there also has to be an expectation of ongoing employment. So say you're a casual, and then the employer says, for the next year, we may or may not be offering you shifts. We're not sure. We have to wait and see how things pick up, or if they do pick up or not. Then they might not be able to put in a flexible work request because they may not have that continuing reasonable expectation of ongoing employment. So, as I say, first of all, you have to be there for a minimum period of 12 months, whether you're part-time, full-time or casual. And the casual employee has to reasonably expect that work to continue.
Forvis Mazars. Same local team, new global reach. A new two-firm network still offering international audit, tax and advisory services, committed to helping our clients confidently build and grow their businesses. Move forward with Forvis Mazars. Visit forvismazars.com/au. That's forvismazars.com/au.
What is the main change these new laws have introduced?
The main change is that now, as opposed to previous, either party, the employer or the employee, can take an unresolved issue or dispute as to a flexible work request to the Fair Work Commission. Previously that didn't exist, now it does.
What existed before?
A written request, the employer could respond or not respond, refuse, give the request or consent to the request, and that was it.
Right. There was no way for the employee to go
Not really, apart from if there's a clause in the enterprise agreement or an award that has a dispute resolution process. Sometimes employees could take advantage of that dispute resolution process, which could just mean that they have to meet and discuss, and then they escalate it to a mediation. But that mediation could be with anybody. Now, you can actually go to the Fair Work Commission, and the Fair Work Commission can not only allow parties to reach an agreement there as to the request, but the Fair Work Commission can actually make a decision, a binding decision on the request.
Okay.
And that didn't exist previously.
Right. So if an employee would like some flexibility with their work arrangements and makes a formal request for their employer, and the employer thinks validly that, no, we can't do that, I have valid reasons for that decision, and they're at loggerheads, both are digging their heels in and no resolution is made, what happens?
Well, the employee can say, I'll leave that for another time. Maybe when circumstances change in the business, I can put the request in again and it might be accepted next time. Or they can go to the Fair Work Commission, and similarly to the unfair dismissal process, they can have a conciliation. Usually would be done over the phone. A conciliation is a mediation in another guise, or using a different word. The parties try to resolve it informally, reach a binding agreement. If the matter doesn't resolve, then it goes to an arbitration, which is a semi-formal court-like process where a binding decision is being made by an arbitrator.
Mm-hmm. What if the request is absurd? And I don't have a definition to give you, Paul, on what is absurdity, but to the lay person it might come across as ridiculous. The employer refuses. The employee still can take it to the Fair Work Commission.
They can, but the employer can't refuse for any old reason. But if a request is absurd, they could refuse it because they could say that's not reasonable business grounds. There's always a balancing act in this situation between the rights of the employers to run their business how they wish, but also with the concept in mind that employees do have a life outside work and they have other commitments and consideration that come in.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts, Paul, on flexible work arrangements?
Yeah, so we said before there's qualifications that you have to be employed at the employment for 12 months. The flexible work request can't be made for any old reason, which goes back to your question about absurdity. Normally, they are only able to be made by somebody who's a carer, somebody whose immediate family member is suffering domestic violence, or that person, the employee themselves, are suffering domestic violence. They have some medical needs. They're over the age of 55, various things like that, and childcare commitments as well. They come into it, of course. That would be potentially the most common. So that's the other qualifying criteria. That's my last thoughts, that, you know, if somebody said, I want to do a flexible work request so I don't work Thursday nights because I have footy training, that category does not fit. So they wouldn't be able to make a flexible work request officially. They can still talk to the employer about it and they could come to a verbal arrangement, maybe even want to put it in writing, but that doesn't come under the umbrella of this flexible work request process.
That was Paul Cott, Principal at Law on Lydiard. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more B Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Forvis Mazars. To find out more, visit forvismazars.com/au. That's FORVISMAZARS.com/au.